My name's Tim Craig, and I was born in Lockport, New York, which will end up being an interesting part of the story because that's where Harrison Radiator was founded, and it actually becomes part of my story around mobile air conditioning. I grew up in that city, and in fact, my father worked for Harrison Radiator as a liaison engineer, and we also worked on cars together. So that sort of built my interest in cars and understanding how they worked, and actually got me interested in engineering. So through watching my father working together on cars and being interested in engineering, I ended up, after graduating from high school, going to Purdue University and studied mechanical engineering. Really enjoyed undergraduate and stayed on for a master's degree. And once I finished that, or as part of that actually, I was a co-op student, and that helped in many ways. First of all, as an undergraduate student, it helped get experience in the engineering field, which was excellent. And every other semester after my freshman year, I would work the semester, then go to school a semester, and then work a semester. And it also helped pay for college. So it worked out great. That happened to be with the Union Carbide Corporation, and it was a Linde division in Tonawanda, New York. They were in the industrial gas business, which is separating the air into its constituents and selling those constituents. So nitrogen, oxygen, and argon are the primary constituents. And that got me involved in mechanical equipment, in particular compressors and turbines, and understanding the refrigeration cycle. And so after graduation, I spent about 10 years with Linde working on mechanical equipment. And then an opportunity opened up at Harrison Radiator, part of General Motors. And I took that opportunity and began my venture into mobile air conditioning.
Where Dad worked?
Where my dad worked, he didn't work there at the time, he had already retired. But associates of his were still there.
So did he work in the same factory that I went to?
He did. Same building we were in when we did the development work and did that project with the secondary loop.
Wow, that's cool.
Same building.
Yeah.
So it was great. There was a history there. Actually, when you're younger, you think you never want to do that. And it's until you get older and realize, what it's really made up of, and the expertise that was in that building, and the ability to learn and contribute, that really changes your perspective on, what's available in the industry, what was available in Lockport, New York. So that was great.
Yeah. That's really, in my mind, Lockport and Dayton, Ohio that's where air conditioning in cars came from.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, sort of an outgrowth of the Frigidaire Corporation, the Frigidaire division of General Motors, which was in the Dayton area, and they had the air conditioning compressor. And then in Lockport, all the other parts were made, the air handling, HVAC module, and all the heat exchangers, as well as, of course, radiators, which was the origin. And eventually that was merged to come up with the system component supply, be able to supply all the components an air conditioning system needs. And that really brought it together. And once that was all merged, we took advantage of the opportunities to learn together and develop systems. So that's where I started in the mobile air conditioning, which was in system development. How do you take a vehicle and operate it in the climate wind tunnel and modify the system either from a controls perspective or a component perspective so that it could achieve its performance objectives.
So that's what you first did?
My first job.
Yeah.
And that was actually on medium-duty trucks and what we called pie trucks, which were the delivery trucks. They were base trucks, but they were just as important as any other vehicle. The challenges of the refrigerant system were just the same. Maybe the performance targets were a bit different. Thinking medium-duty trucks, those are pop or beer truck delivery trucks.
So what were they? What year?
This was in the early 90s. And the medium-duty truck was a big part of General Motors' portfolio at the time. And it was actually made in Janesville, Wisconsin. and we were developing those systems to make sure that they would meet the standards that anyone would expect when they got in a vehicle. A lot of them were lacking the insulation that a car had, so there were some real performance challenges. The medium-duty truck ended up being common on the HVAC side with the CK truck or the pickup truck. So they shared components. And so, you know, the performance inside the cab was very similar. Under the hood, of course, powertrain lineups were very different. So a lot of application challenges there. But that's why I started in it, you know, where you really learned. You were in the tunnel running these vehicles. It worked, it didn't work. What components do I have to change? How do I optimize the system to really make it work great? We worked in cooperation with, you know, engineers from the vehicle side and, you know, all the Harrison folks. And these tunnels, as you saw, there were 6 climate wind tunnels in Lockport running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Really?
And constantly running vehicles through there to develop, because they did both the engine cooling and the HVAC. So all that was going on.
Wow.
So after that experience, for about 2 years, I was asked if I would be interested in moving to Michigan to work directly on vehicle development. So we did that in about 1990. I started working there, moved my family there in 91, and began to work on the vans specifically, GM's vans, which were the M van and the G van. And at that time, there was a requirement to put airbags in the vehicles. And because they had to integrate the airbag into the instrument panel, the HVAC module had to change. So it was, again, a development, new products for Harrison so that they could be adapted to the vans and accommodate the airbags that were coming into the vehicle. This was 1996 was the first production year for the airbags. So between 92 and say 95, we were developing the new HVAC systems to accommodate the airbag implementation. Well, they were coming in, and you know, these beams had to be put in. At the time, magnesium beams had to be the main structure to put in to be able to handle the requirements of the airbag. And all that structure underneath the instrument panel took up so much space that really had to optimize the HVAC module. And that was the challenge. At the same time, the old G van was going away, and a new G van called the GMT 600 was coming in, and we developed a new HVAC system for that as well. So those are fantastic opportunities, a lot of on-road development, working with actually the assembly plants and how they were going to build the truck that had all this new content. It was the full scope, and it was the most fun I ever had. I was on the road around Michigan to multiple locations, was constantly meeting new people and you know, innovating with new people, and I had a ball doing that.
Did you go down to the proving grounds in Arizona?
Yeah, every summer. Every summer we spent multiple weeks in the summer at the proving grounds. Harrison had a major representative there. They were really the go-to folks for air conditioning. So if you had an air conditioning issue at the desert proving grounds, you went to Walt Wittard, who was a Harrison employee, and he helped you get it fixed. So it was great. The extension after being in Michigan, it came back. The opportunity was to work with our South American team to take on a manager role and help everything that had to be done in South America. We did it with a team out of Lockport, but we would travel to South America multiple times a year. So operations in Brazil, Argentina, and Venezuela at the time, visiting all those operations, working with customers, made fantastic friends, had terrific colleagues in South America. It was just a great time.
So you used to go to the plants where they build the cars?
Plants where they build the cars, plants where we made our components, and especially working with customer engineers to help design the systems they need and get the components they needed, whether it be a new radiator for powertrain cooling, a new compressor, whatever they needed, we would work to adapt the system and get them the components and the systems they needed to meet the demands of the customers in their local region.
So they weren't, those cars that are built down in South America aren't engineered in Michigan?
No, a lot of them, what they are is they are base designs engineered in Michigan that are adapted to the South American market. if you would take a particular vehicle like an S truck, the mid-size pickup truck. The first four-door version was built in Brazil because the demand in the market, to really make it effective, they needed to have the passenger capacity in South America. So we worked on developing an S truck with four-door capacity. I mean, eventually, of course, it came to the U.S. as well, but it was in production in Brazil first. So that kind of was a local adaptation of the base truck design in North America. And there was a lot of that done, a lot of customization for what that market needed, and also be able to make all the components you could locally. I became involved later in the career, so after doing some engineering application, I was asked to become part of the team that was developing the next low global warming refrigerant, low GWP refrigerant. And at the time, there was multiple options being evaluated, and we were working with the global automotive industry, which was another fantastic opportunity. We had meetings basically all over the world, but primarily in Europe and the US, with representatives of all the supply community, all the OEM groups, and everyone trying to work together on deciding on what the next refrigerant would be to satisfy the new regulation in Europe, to meet that requirement of global warming potential less than 150. So I started around 2006 in that activity, and SAE and MACS were important parts of that activity. So working on the standards required for whatever the new refrigerant was going to be, as well as what the service requirements were. So as you know, we would have multiple meetings at the same time, and in particular, whenever there was an event with MACS, it was the opportunity to bring the global automotive HVAC industry together and talk about the progress toward introducing the new refrigerant. So between 2006 and the introduction in 2012 of R1234YF, the focus was, as a global industry, how are we going to get to that next refrigerant? And at that time, MACS was an opportunity to get the teams together, as well as do training sessions. It did two really eventful training sessions. The first one I did with a colleague, Jim Baker, who was well known within MACS, and it was about R1234YF around 2011, when there was a lot of work that had been done, but there was a major controversy had come up about the safety of 1234YF. We put on a training session, multiple training sessions at MACS, and I'll never forget it. We had more than standing room only after the training sessions, where we discussed all the details of this new refrigerant, as well as the challenges associated with flammability. And I don't recall who from MACS came in and said, "You have sucked the oxygen out of the room." And we did. We had great sessions, a lot of questions and answers. There was certainly a lot of interest in what the next refrigerant was going to be. So the service community was just anxious to get any information they could about what this new refrigerant was going to be, how it was going to impact the service industry, and we had an opportunity to explain that to them, from the fundamentals right down to what it would mean in service, and it was a great exchange. Really enjoyed it.
Wow, so you used to teach classes. Was that at the general session, or did you have separate?
It was part of the general sessions. Yeah. So that was the first one that we did, and then in 2016, I think, with another colleague, Lindsay Leitzel from Delphi at the time, we did a session called "The Changing Role of the Refrigerant System in Automotive Applications," and that was foretelling how the electric vehicles were going to change the role of the refrigerant system. That now you had batteries and power electronics along with the cabin to have to manage, and the changing terminology of thermal management instead of air conditioning. So again, we had really good attendance. We talked about all the impacts of adding chillers, and how the battery was going to react, and how the control systems are going to change, how heat pumps were going to impact the systems, had great response, great questions and answers, and we really enjoyed the exchange with the service community. Because that was a fun session. You know, the slides from that session are referenced to this day because of the information that was in there and the consolidation of information. It was great. At that time, there were 8 vehicles that had heat pumps in the market already, 8 electric vehicles. And we had the opportunity again to have that exchange with the service community and answer the questions that they had. And it was a really good exchange. Then at the same time, we were working with SAE and all the standards. In the background, R152A had been approved through the EPA SNAP process under the Clean Air Act, and the use condition was that a secondary loop was required. So we developed secondary loop componentry. The chillers had come into the industry because of the electric vehicles, and they were common. We took automotive components then, put together the secondary loop in concert with IGSD and the CCAC, which are both 2 environmental concerns. And we put together a vehicle with Tata Motors, which you talked about this morning, which was a dual evaporator van that had R152A and a secondary loop. And we were able to demonstrate the performance, demonstrate the advantages, show how you could have energy savings at a vehicle level by implementing a secondary loop, and also use R152A as a very efficient refrigerant that was inexpensive and could be used in the countries that had growing air conditioning penetration in their countries, and had very successful outcome. We showed, you know, multiple ways to save energy, something on the order of 3% improvement in fuel economy based on how you used the cold storage that is an inherent part of a secondary loop, because you store cold energy in the coolant. And if you use that stored cold energy correctly, you can improve the fuel economy of the vehicle. And it was demonstrated by Tata Motors and their fuel economy group that you could get up to 3% improvement in fuel economy by using a secondary loop. So that was fantastic.
Do engine start-stop.
Using start-stop by shutting the engine off appropriately, using the stored cold energy to keep passengers comfort, but then put the energy back into that coolant when the engine was running very efficient. So shut the compressor off and unload the engine when it's running inefficient, turn the compressor on, and get the cooling you need when the engine's running very efficient, and you net fuel savings from that.
Did they ever implement it?
They haven't implemented, and part of the reason is that this push toward a heat pump refrigerant sort of interrupted the process. I think it's possible the stationary industry will actually pick up R152A before the automotive, but it's still an opportunity to look across the industry, whether it's in heavy duty, whether it's in buses, or again, light duty vehicles, to take advantage of it. So it's a fantastic opportunity. One of the things that Tata Motors asked for was to get the standards in place. So over about a 2.5-year period, with a lot of support from many people within SAE as well as IGSD, we were able to get all the standards required within SAE to be able to implement R152A in a secondary loop. That was another milestone in mobile air conditioning. I had probably 3 favorite projects. The first one was being in Michigan and working on the development of future vehicles. The opportunity to go to design staff and see how it was going to look when it was still a clay model, to be involved in building the first mule vehicles, see how they would work, to working with all the different pieces of vehicle development was just fun every day. And so that was the first time. The second one was learning about the industry by helping introduce the components for one of the bigger programs at General Motors, which was the 1999 full-size truck program. that was a global international effort, and had a great time with that. But probably the most fun was getting into the advanced engineering development, working on the new refrigerant and getting that introduced, making sure that the products that Delphi needed at the time were ready for R1234YF, and working with the international team, making so many friends, accomplishing a lot, and having a lot of fun doing it. So that was really the pinnacle.
Yeah, because you guys changed the world in air conditioning.
It really was amazing that although we had the constraints to meet the regulation, that the innovation that came to do that by having the new refrigerant available and making sure we could accommodate the characteristics of that refrigerant, and then now have it in, I think, over 120 million vehicles in the last 10 years is what I recently heard this week, is really a great accomplishment, and great from an environmental perspective as well.
Yeah.
And great in the service industry, because you know how the reclaim, recycle machines have evolved to satisfy 1234YF is really terrific.
Yeah. Well, I mean, were you around during, it sounds like you started right as 12 was going away.
Yes, when I started, that was a part of the job. We introduced the first R134A vehicles in GM. The trucks were some of the first in 93, 94, 95. So that required, of course, new heat exchangers and new systems, really, to satisfy the characteristic of that refrigerant. So I was at the front end on the introduction of R134A, and kind of on the tail end in the introduction of R1234YF.
Did you work on the Cadillac system for?
I was working on the M-band system, actually, for 134A.
Oh yeah, no, right, yeah. Because my G-Van had 134A,
Yep,
93 G-Van. But I mean, were you working on the, what was it, the CTX was the first Cadillac with?
Yeah, I was not involved in the trucks, or in the cars. I was on the truck side. So it was kind of happening in parallel.
Did they ever do any trucks with YF yet? GM?
I think, yeah, they're YF.
Did you work on those, or?
We worked on, I think at the time, once the refrigerant was ready to go, I moved into developing advanced products at Delphi. So the application to vehicles was to the vehicle development engineers, and I stayed in the advanced side, working on the next generation of components and systems for the industry as it was evolving, the electrification of the industry, essentially. So
you were beyond that.
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
Well, I had a passion.
You already did that.
I had a passion for what comes next.
Right.
That's what towards the end of the last half of my career, the last third was, what's next? How do we make sure we're ready for what comes next? And that was a lot of fun. And most fun aspects of that were working with customers on future program projects. Can we take an existing vehicle and adapt it in a new way to apply new technology? And that was a lot of fun. I will say that the most interesting part of electrification is that thermal management is a more important part of the vehicle than it was with internal combustion engines, because you impact so many critical features in managing the health of the vehicle, the success of the vehicle on the road, from battery thermal management, power electronics thermal management, as well as efficiently keeping passengers comfortable. So I think what we're going to see is this continued push toward more efficient systems, more innovation around efficiency, more focus toward environmental stewardship, which has always been an important part of it, and why I continue to work with IGSD on opportunities to lower the carbon footprint of automotive air conditioning. And I think the opportunities that exist as these electric vehicles evolve are really the future, and really an exciting opportunity to be in the industry. It's exciting. I mean, if you're a young engineer, one of the interesting points is that, as we know, computers are a part of everything. And so as a thermal engineer, you you have to be aware of how the system operates, what the components are, but you have to be attentive to the controls. How is that system going to be controlled? What are going to be the key features of it? How is the control going to be implemented? How can I be involved in this control strategy? Because that is going to be really important going forward.
Did you work on the control side, like in GM with development on that? Like, because in the early 90s, we're still orifice tube. You know,
Yeah.
the old, like what I
Right.
say, the old school. Like you slide that knob over to max AC, you're putting power to the clutch on
Yeah.
that switch.
Well, there was controls evolution relative to towards automatic systems because they had brushless blower motors, and you need a different power controller. So linear power modules were coming in. There were more efficient ways to control brushless blower motors. So I was early involved in that and designs of linear power modules because we were using them. But the control strategy now has grown to looking at the thermal systems. So what I was pushing and we were working on at MAHLE, which was the end of the career when we became MAHLE, was making sure we knew what algorithms were required to control the thermal management system. How did you satisfy the battery requirement, the power electronic requirement, which included the electric motor, as well as the cabin? How did those all work together? What control strategies were needed to do that? And that got right down to developing the physical models and the interfaces and actually getting the software into the controller and making sure it worked and actually developing the software. So I think that's a key element. If you're coming out as a young engineer, look at the control side and understand that, as well as understanding the thermodynamics and the components. Also want to say is that I was really honored and humbled by receiving the Pioneer Award today. When I was first notified about it, I was amazed and very humbled. It's a recognition, of course, of a long time of contribution, and I appreciate that. But as everyone says, and is so true, it's the people I worked with. It's the colleagues that I worked with every day. It's the people that were part of SAE. It's the people that were part of MACS that really made and generated the opportunities for me to do the things that I was recognized for, and I really appreciate that. But it's all the people I worked with that made it possible, for sure.